As we approach the anniversary of the birth of Thomas Jefferson, we thought this would be a good time to revisit the very first episode of Legalese, where we examined Jefferson's famous wall of separation between church and state. However, for most of us, during these times, under these circumstances, we're experiencing the cooperation of church and state, and that's entirely appropriate as well. There's a long history and tradition of that in this country. Now, if government begins to treat churches unfairly or treat them differently than other institutions, then you should give us a call. We can help you and your local, county, or state government resolve the situation in a way that is consistent with the Constitution and that protects religious liberty. So I hope you will enjoy this look back at the very first episode of Legalese, and stay tuned for more. This year we celebrate what would have been the 276th birthday for Thomas Jefferson. And yeah, that's a long time ago. But his influence on America is still felt to this very day. Jefferson was the quintessential Renaissance man. He spoke multiple languages, he was a historian, an author, an elected official. His influence on the American founding cannot be overstated. His Virginia Statute for Religious Freedom served as the inspiration for some of the most important documents in our country's history. But in certain circles today, he's known more for a phrase called separation of church and state. And a lot of Americans are wondering, what's the deal with this so-called wall of separation? Let's start with something Jefferson wrote in Virginia Statute of Religious Freedom, 1779.
No man shall suffer on account of his religious opinions or belief, but that all men shall be free to profess, and by argument to maintain, their opinions in matters of religion, and that the same shall in no wise diminish, enlarge, or affect their civil capacities.
Okay, that's quite a mouthful. So what was Jefferson really trying to say? For us, it means that for people of faith, you have the right to live according to that faith, live according to the dictates of your own conscience, and that should not prevent you from bringing those beliefs into your daily life, whether it's in business, whether it's in the public square, in government, any of the institutions that make up our society. Number two, in a letter to Reverend Samuel Miller in 1808, Thomas Jefferson wrote the following.
I consider the government of the U.S. as interdicted by the Constitution from intermeddling with religious institutions, their doctrines, discipline, or exercises.
You're probably thinking, what does interdicted mean? One thing it's important to note is that this letter was written after the infamous letter that contained the words, the wall of separation of church and state. And in plain English, what Jefferson is saying is that government has no business telling the church what to do. There will be no official church of the United States. Government should have no influence over the teachings of any church or house of worship in this country, period. That's it. Number three, also from 1808, in a letter from Jefferson to the Virginia Baptist Association of Chesterfield.
We have solved by fair experiment the great and interesting question, whether freedom of religion is compatible with order in government and obedience to the laws, and we have experienced the quiet as well as the comfort which results from leaving everyone to profess freely and openly profess those principles of religion which are the inductions of his own reason.
You may have friends or acquaintances who constantly claim that people of faith are just using religious freedom as an excuse to discriminate, or that religious people just want to impose their views on everyone else. Well, this Jefferson quote is for them. What Jefferson is actually saying is that the American experiment that he was so integral to has proven that religious freedom is actually essential for good government and for building a civil society. Last two, number 4 and 5, starting with a letter from Jefferson to Richard Douglass in 1809, where he wrote,
No provision in our Constitution ought to be dearer to man than that which protects the rights of conscience against the enterprises of the civil authority.
And another similar letter he wrote to Richard Rush just a few years later.
I have considered it as a matter between every man and his Maker, in which no other, and far less the public, had a right to intermeddle.
Okay, so in both these letters, Jefferson is really going after one big idea, and that is religious freedom is really about protecting the rights of conscience. And that's why people of all faiths or no faith should care about religious freedom in America. For people of faith, their conscience is informed by their faith. For people who aren't particularly religious, they still have a conscience, and they have the right to live according to it, no matter what that conscience is informed by. Americans have the right to live according to what they believe, and government should not interfere with that right. Well, there you have it. 5 quotes from Jefferson in his own words discussing religion and religious freedom. I hope this has been helpful to you to get a better understanding of your first freedom and maybe put to rest the idea of the wall of separation of church and state that's so conspicuously absent from our Constitution.